The gunshot that echoed through the dusty streets of Jerome, Arizona on that scorching August afternoon in 1882 would change 2 lives forever, though neither Warren Rutherford nor Flora Preston could have known it at the time. Flora pressed her trembling hands against the stranger's blood-soaked shirt, her fingers slipping on the warm wetness as she tried desperately to staunch the flow. The man had stumbled into her family's general store moments ago, clutching his side, his face pale as milk beneath the grime and sweat. He had collapsed near the flour barrels, sending white powder billowing into the air like desert dust. "Please," Flora called out to the gathering crowd, "someone fetch Dr. Hartwell." Her father, Thomas Preston, pushed through the gawking onlookers and knelt beside her. His weathered face creased with worry as he took in the situation. "I will go," he said, squeezing her shoulder before running toward the doctor's office 3 buildings down. Flora kept pressure on the wound, her blue cotton dress already ruined with crimson stains. The stranger's eyes fluttered open, dark and pained. He looked young, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years. His breathing came in shallow gasps. "Hold on," she whispered. "The doctor is coming." But when her father returned, his face told the story before his words did. "Hartwell refuses. Says the man is an outlaw, that he saw wanted posters matching his description in Prescott last week." "What?" Flora's voice rose sharp with disbelief. "He is dying." "Doc says he will not risk his reputation treating criminals. Says if the law comes asking, he does not want to be implicated." The stranger made a weak sound, something between a laugh and a sob. "Figures," he managed to rasp. "Always knew I would die in some dusty town." Flora looked around at the faces pressed in the doorway. Most showed curiosity, some showed pity, but none showed any intention of helping. Jerome was a copper mining town, rough and practical, where people minded their own business and strangers were viewed with suspicion. That was when Warren Rutherford stepped forward. He had been standing at the back of the crowd, having just arrived in town that morning after 3 weeks on the trail moving cattle from the southern ranges. Dust still clung to his dark hair, and his green eyes were red-rimmed from long days under the relentless sun. At 26, he had the lean, muscled build of a man who lived in the saddle, and the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough of life to know when to act. "There is a doctor in Prescott," Warren said, his voice carrying clearly through the murmuring crowd. "I can have him there in a few hours if I push hard." Thomas Preston shook his head. "Prescott is 40 miles from here, son. By good roads on a fresh horse, you might make it by nightfall, but you look like you have been riding for days already." "My horse is tired but sound, and I have done harder rides." Warren moved closer, his eyes meeting Flora's. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a shared conviction that a man's life mattered more than convenience or reputation. "He will die before you get back," someone in the crowd muttered. Warren knelt beside the wounded man, assessing him with a practiced eye. "Maybe, but he will definitely die if nobody tries." He looked at Flora. "Can you keep him alive for a few hours?" Flora swallowed hard. She had helped her mother nurse sick children and tended to minor injuries around the store, but nothing like this. Still, she met Warren's gaze steadily. "I can try. That is all any of us can do." Warren stood, already moving toward the door. "Keep pressure on the wound, give him water if he can drink, and pray." Thomas Preston caught Warren's arm. "Why would you do this? You do not know this man. You just rode into town." Warren paused, and for a moment something old and painful flickered across his face. "Because someone should," he said simply. Then he was gone, his boots thudding on the wooden planks of the sidewalk as he ran toward where he had left his horse at the livery. Flora heard the thunder of hoofbeats moments later, fading rapidly as Warren pushed his mount into a gallop down the road toward Prescott. She turned her attention back to the wounded man, her father helping her move him to a more comfortable position on several feed sacks they had piled together. The crowd gradually dispersed, disappointed that the drama seemed to be over. Only her father remained, and Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, who brought clean rags and a basin of water without being asked. You have a good heart, Flora Preston, Mrs. Chen said softly in her accented English, but the cowboy is right. This one might not make it. Then I will sit with him so he does not die alone, Flora replied, dipping a rag in the cool water and gently cleaning the blood from the stranger's face. The afternoon crawled by like a wounded animal. Flora changed the bandages twice, relieved each time to see that the bleeding seemed to be slowing. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling incoherent words. Once he called out a woman's name, Sarah, with such longing that Flora felt tears prick her eyes. Her father brought her coffee and bread, insisting she eat something. You have been at this for 3 hours, Ree, he said. Let me take over for a while. No, I started this. I will see it through. She sipped the coffee gratefully, though, letting its warmth fortify her. Thomas studied her with his wise, steady gaze. That cowboy impressed you. It was not a question, but Flora answered anyway. He did the right thing. Why did no one else even offer? Because people are afraid. Hartwell said the man might be an outlaw. Getting involved with outlaws brings trouble. And if he is not? What if the doctor was wrong? Flora adjusted the bandage, checking the wound again. Even if he is, does that mean he deserves to bleed to death on our floor? Her father smiled faintly. You sound like your mother. She always believed everyone deserved a chance at redemption. He paused, his expression growing distant. Mary Preston had died 2 years ago from a fever, and the loss still carved a hollow place in both their hearts. She would be proud of you today. Flora blinked back tears, focusing on the task at hand. The sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple visible through the store's front window. Warren had been gone for 4 hours. Prescott was 40 miles away. Even riding hard, he could not possibly return before full dark. I am going to light the lamps, her father said, and I will put fresh coffee on. It is going to be a long night. As darkness fell over Jerome, Flora found herself thinking about the cowboy who had ridden away on a tired horse to help a stranger. She knew nothing about him except that he possessed a core of decency that seemed increasingly rare in these rough territories. His eyes had been kind despite their weariness, and when he had looked at her, she had felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening in a room she had not known existed. She shook her head at her own foolishness. The man had simply done a good deed. That was no reason for her heart to race at the memory of his voice, low and determined, saying, "That is all any of us can do." The wounded man stirred, his eyes opening more clearly than they had in hours. "Water," he whispered. Flora helped him drink from a tin cup, supporting his head carefully. "Slowly," she cautioned, "not too much at once." The cowboy, he managed after a few sips. He really went? He did. Rode out 4 hours ago. Damn fool, the stranger said, but there was wonder in his voice. He could get himself killed pushing a horse that hard in the dark. Flora had not let herself think about that possibility. The roads between Jerome and Prescott wound through rough country, full of gullies and loose rock. A horse could step wrong, snap a leg. A rider could be thrown, break his neck. And there were other dangers too, bandits, hostile groups, wild animals. "He will make it," she said with more confidence than she felt. "You know him?" "No. He just arrived in town today." The stranger's eyes widened slightly. "Then why?" "I have been asking myself the same question." Flora dabbed at his forehead with a cool cloth. "What is your name?" He hesitated, and she understood. If he was wanted, giving his name could bring consequences. "You can call me Jack," he finally said. "Is that your real name?" "Does it matter?" Flora considered this. "I suppose not. I am Flora Preston. This is my father's store." "I am sorry," Jack said. "Sorry for the trouble, for the blood, for everything." "Save your strength. You can apologize to the cowboy when he gets back with the doctor." "What is his name? The cowboy?" Flora realized she did not know. In all the urgency and chaos, Warren had never introduced himself. "I did not ask," she admitted. Jack made a sound that might have been a laugh if he had more strength. "Two people trying to save my worthless life, and we do not even know each other's names. There is something poetic in that, I think." "Your life is not worthless," Flora said firmly. "Every life has value." "You did not see what I have done, who I have been." "Maybe not. But I see who you are right now. A man fighting to live. That counts for something." They fell into silence after that, Jack seeming to drift into sleep or unconsciousness. Flora could not tell which. She kept her vigil, changing the bandages again as midnight approached. The bleeding had nearly stopped, which she hoped was a good sign. Her father had dozed off in a chair near the counter, exhausted from the day's tension. The store was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant howl of a coyote somewhere in the hills. Flora must have dozed off herself because she woke with a start to the sound of horses outside and voices calling. She scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over the water basin, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see lantern light. The door burst open, and Warren Rutherford strode in, followed by an older man carrying a medical bag. Warren's face was drawn with exhaustion, covered in a fresh layer of dust and sweat. His shirt was dark with perspiration, and his horse had been ridden hard, but his eyes were alert, immediately finding Flora's. "He is alive?" Warren asked. "Yes. The bleeding has mostly stopped, but he has been unconscious for the last hour." The doctor, a grizzled man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, immediately knelt beside Jack and began examining him. "Name is Edmund Crawford," he said brusquely as he worked. "Someone tell me what happened?" Flora explained while Dr. Crawford cut away the makeshift bandages to examine the wound properly. Warren stood nearby, swaying slightly on his feet, and Flora realized he was about to collapse from exhaustion. "Sit," she commanded, pulling over a wooden stool, "before you fall down." Warren sank onto it gratefully. "I am fine. Just tired." "You rode 80 miles in less than 8 hours. You are more than tired." Flora poured him coffee, pressing the cup into his hands. Their fingers brushed, and she felt that strange flutter in her chest again. "Had to," Warren said simply. "Made a promise." Dr. Crawford looked up from his examination. "You the one who rode to Prescott?" "Yes, sir." "You saved this man's life. The wound itself is not fatal if treated properly, but he would have bled out or gotten an infection without proper care. Young lady, you did well keeping him stable." He nodded to Flora. "Now I need better light and my instruments. Can we move him somewhere more suitable?" Thomas, now awake, stepped forward. "We have a room in the back. Use it for storage, but there is a cot." Together, Warren and Thomas carried Jack to the back room while Flora helped Dr. Crawford set up his supplies. The surgery took nearly an hour, Crawford working with swift precision to clean the wound, remove the bullet that had lodged near Jack's ribcage, and stitch him closed. "He will live," Crawford announced when he was done, washing his hands in a basin. "Needs rest and care, but he should recover fully." Flora felt relief wash over her so powerfully that her knees went weak. Warren, who had been standing near the door, closed his eyes briefly, and she saw his shoulders slump as the tension left him. "Now," Crawford said, fixing Warren with a stern look, "you need to rest before you collapse. When did you last sleep?" 2 nights ago, I think. Been driving cattle, then this." "You have a place to stay?" Warren shook his head. "Just got into town this morning. Have not had a chance to find lodging." "The boarding house is full," Mrs. Chen said, appearing in the doorway. She had returned when she heard the commotion. "But I have a small room in my own house I rent sometimes. You can take it, Cowboy. First night is free for what you did today." "I can pay," Warren started to protest. "First night is free," Mrs. Chen repeated firmly. "You saved a life today. That deserves something." Thomas Preston stepped forward, extending his hand to Warren. "I did not get a chance to thank you properly. Thomas Preston. This is my daughter, Flora." Warren shook his hand, then turned to Flora. "Warren Rutherford, madam. Pleased to make your acquaintance. though I wish it were under better circumstances. Even exhausted and filthy from the road, there was something in the way Warren looked at her that made Flora's breath catch. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and she saw in them a depth of character that confirmed her earlier impression. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Rutherford," she managed. "What you did today was extraordinary. Just did what needed doing." But he smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his tired face. Dr. Crawford cleared his throat. "All very touching, but this young man needs sleep before he drops dead in front of us, which would rather defeat the purpose of tonight's heroics. Mrs. Chen, show him to that room. Miss Preston, I will need someone to help me monitor the patient through the night." "I will do it," Flora said immediately. Her father gave her a knowing look, but did not protest. "I will be in the living quarters if you need anything. Doctor, you are welcome to stay as well." "I will, thank you. Want to keep an eye on things." Warren followed Mrs. Chen toward the door, but paused at the threshold, looking back at Flora. "I am glad he made it," he said softly. "Because of you," Flora replied. "Thank you, Mr. Rutherford." "Warren," he corrected. "After tonight, I think we can use first names." "Then you should call me Flora." He smiled again. That same warm expression that made something inside her chest feel like it was opening up, letting in light. "Flora," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Pretty name. Suits you." Then he was gone, following Mrs. Chen into the night, and Flora was left standing in the doorway, very aware that her heart was beating faster than it should be. Dr. Crawford chuckled from behind her. "Now that is an interesting development." Flora spun around, feeling her cheeks flush. "I do not know what you mean." "Of course not." But his eyes twinkled with amusement. "Come on, girl. Let me show you how to monitor his vital signs. We have a long night ahead." Jack woke near dawn, groggy and confused, but alive. Flora was there immediately, giving him water and explaining what had happened. His relief at being alive warred with what looked like guilt on his face. "The cowboy made it back," he said wonderingly. "His name is Warren Rutherford, and yes, he made it. Rode 80 miles in less than 8 hours to save your life." "Why?" Jack's voice was barely a whisper. "Because he is a good man, I think, the kind who does not need a reason beyond it being the right thing to do." Jack closed his eyes, and Flora thought he might have fallen back asleep, but then he spoke again. "I am not worth that kind of effort. I have done things, been part of things, that would make you both regret helping me." "That is in the past," Flora said gently. "Today is a new day. What you do with the life you have been given back, that is what matters now." Dr. Crawford, who had been dozing in a chair, stirred and came to check on Jack. After a thorough examination, he declared himself satisfied with the patient's progress. "Keep him resting for at least a week. Change the bandages twice daily. Watch for infection. If he develops a fever, send for me immediately." "You are going back to Prescott?" Flora asked. "This afternoon, once I have rested a bit. I have patients there who need me." He paused, studying her face. "You have been up all night. Get some rest yourself, young lady." But Flora found she could not rest. After her father took over watching Jack, she went to her room and changed into a clean dress, a pale yellow one with white lace at the collar. She told herself she was not primping, just making herself presentable after the night's ordeal. The fact that Warren might stop by the store later had nothing to do with her choice of her nicest everyday dress. She had just finished pinning up her dark hair when she heard the bell over the store's front door jingle. Her heart jumped, and she hurried out to find Warren standing near the counter, looking considerably better after some sleep. He had washed and shaved and changed into a clean shirt, dark blue, that brought out his eyes. "Morning," he said, pulling off his hat. "I wanted to check on the patient before I headed out." Flora's stomach dropped. "Headed out?" "Need to report back to the ranch. I was supposed to return yesterday, but with everything that happened, I sent a message with someone heading south. Still, I should get back." "Oh, of course." Flora tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Jack is doing well. Dr. Crawford says he should recover fully." "That is good news." Warren turned his hat in his hands, seeming reluctant to leave. I'm glad it worked out." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both wanting to say something more but not knowing what. Finally, Warren spoke. "Miss Flora, I know we just met, and under strange circumstances, but I was wondering if I might come back to visit sometime, not just to check on Jack, but to see you, if that would be all right." Flora felt warmth flood through her. "I would like that very much." His face broke into a grin. "Really? Really?" She smiled back, suddenly feeling shy. "The ranch you work for, is it far from here?" "About a day's ride south, near the border. I work for the Triple Bar Ranch, moving cattle mostly. The boss is a fair man, and the pay is decent." He paused. "I do not have much, but I am honest and hard-working." "I can see that." Flora took a step closer. "Warren, what you did yesterday, riding all that way to save a stranger's life, that shows the kind of man you are. That matters more than how much money you have." "My mama always said character counts more than coin." Warren's expression grew sad. "She died when I was 14. My pa, too. In a farming accident back in Missouri. Been on my own since then, working ranches, trying to make my way. I am sorry I lost my mother 2 years ago. It leaves a hole in your life, doesn't it?" "It does." Warren reached out, hesitating just before his hand touched hers, asking permission with his eyes. Flora closed the distance, letting his warm, calloused fingers wrap around hers. "But we keep going." That is what they would want. They stood there, hands joined, a connection forming that felt both fragile and incredibly strong. Flora had known this man less than a day, but she felt like she could see into his soul, see the goodness and strength there. The moment was broken by Thomas Preston coming from the back room. He stopped when he saw them, taking in their joined hands and the way they were looking at each other. His expression was unreadable. Warren immediately released Flora's hand and straightened. "Mr. Preston, sir, I was just checking on the patient before I head back to my ranch." Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Flora held her breath, hoping her father would not disapprove. Finally, Thomas nodded. "You are welcome here any time, Mr. Rutherford. What you did yesterday shows you are a man of character. We need more men like you in this territory." Relief washed over Warren's face. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." "When will you be back in Jerome?" Thomas asked. "I am not sure, sir. Depends on what the boss needs. But I will make a point to come back as soon as I can." His eyes flicked to Flora. "I have a reason to return now." Thomas's mouth quirked in what might have been approval. "See that you do. My daughter deserves someone who keeps his word." "I will, sir. You have my promise on that." After Warren left, promising to return within the week if he could manage it, Flora found herself unable to concentrate on anything. She went through the motions of her daily tasks at the store, helping customers, restocking shelves, but her mind kept drifting to green eyes and a slow smile that made her heart race. Jack improved rapidly over the next few days. By the 3rd day, he was sitting up and talking, and by the 5th, he was insisting on getting out of bed despite Dr. Crawford's orders to rest. Flora brought him meals and changed his bandages and gradually learned pieces of his story. He had been running with a gang, doing things he was not proud of. Nothing violent, he insisted, mostly stealing horses and selling them across territory lines. But the gang had started getting more ruthless, talking about bank robberies and worse. Jack had wanted out, and when he had said so, the leader had shot him and left him for dead. "I crawled for miles," he told Flora one afternoon. "Thought I was going to die out there in the sun. Then I saw your town, and I thought maybe I had one last chance. Never expected it to turn out like this." "What will you do now?" Flora asked, settling into the chair beside his cot. "I have been thinking about that." Jack looked at his hands, work-worn and scarred. "That cowboy Warren, he gave me a second chance at life. Seems wrong to waste it going back to old ways. I was thinking maybe I could head up to Colorado, to the silver mines. I have cousins up there who have been after me to come work legitimate. Think it is time I took them up on it." "That sounds like a good plan." "What about you and Warren?" Jack asked with a knowing look. "I see how you light up when someone mentions him." Flora felt her cheeks warm. "I barely know him." "Sometimes that does not matter. Sometimes you just know." Jack shifted in the bed, wincing slightly at the movement. "My Sarah, back before I went down the wrong path, I knew the moment I saw her that she was the one. But I was stupid and young and thought making quick money was more important than settling down. By the time I came back for her, she had married someone else. Do not make my mistakes. Flora, when something real comes along, hold on to it." His words stayed with Flora through the long days of waiting for Warren's return. She found herself watching the road, hoping to see a rider approaching. When a full week passed with no word, she began to worry. Had something happened to him? Had he changed his mind about coming back? On the 8th day, she was sweeping the front porch of the store when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see Warren riding down the main street, and her heart leaped. He looked tired and dusty, but when he saw her, his face transformed with a smile that could have lit the entire town. He swung down from his horse and strode toward her, pulling off his hat. "Flora." "Warren." She wanted to throw her arms around him, but settled for a proper greeting, very aware that half the town was probably watching. "You came back." "Told you I would." He glanced around at the curious onlookers, then said in a lower voice, "Is there somewhere we could talk? Somewhere more private?" Flora's pulse quickened. "The store is quiet right now. We could sit on the back porch." She led him through the store, past her father, who gave Warren a nod of approval, and out to the small back porch that overlooked a scrubby garden where her mother had once grown herbs. They sat on the wooden steps, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I have been thinking about you every day," Warren said without preamble. "Could not get you out of my mind. That probably sounds foolish, given we only spent a few hours together." "It does not sound foolish at all," Flora replied, her heart racing. "I have been thinking about you too." Warren turned to face her fully. "I do not have much to offer. A cowboy's wages are not much, and the work is hard, and sometimes dangerous. But I am honest, and I work hard, and I would do right by you. If you would be willing to let me court you properly, I would like to try." Flora felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I would like that very much." "Really?" The hope in his voice was almost painful in its intensity. "Really?" She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Warren, I have lived in this town my whole life. I have known most of these men since we were children. None of them ever rode 80 miles to save a stranger's life. None of them ever looked at me the way you do, like I am something precious." "You are precious," Warren said fiercely. "From the moment I saw you in that store trying to save that man's life, your dress covered in blood, but your face so determined, I felt something shift in my chest. Like I had been walking around with a piece missing and suddenly found it." Flora had never been kissed before, but when Warren leaned toward her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding, and when she responded, she felt like she was falling and flying all at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I will come back every chance I get, every day off, every free moment. I promise you that." "I will be here," Flora whispered. And he did keep that promise. Over the next 3 months, Warren rode to Jerome whenever he could. Sometimes he could only stay for an afternoon, sometimes for a whole day. They walked together through the hills around town, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams of one day having his own small ranch, nothing big, just enough land to raise some cattle and horses and build a real home. She told him about the books she loved to read, about her mother's stories, about her own dreams of a family and a life filled with love and purpose. Jack recovered fully and left for Colorado, but not before shaking Warren's hand and thanking him one more time for the gift of a second chance. "Take care of that girl," he told Warren. "She is special." "I know," Warren replied. "I plan to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve her. The town gradually accepted Warren's presence. At first there had been gossip, people wondering about the cowboy who had appeared from nowhere and swept up Thomas Preston's daughter. But Warren's steady character and obvious devotion to Flora won people over. Even Dr. Hartwell, who had refused to treat Jack, eventually approached Warren in the saloon one evening. "I heard what you did," Hartwell said stiffly. "Writing to Prescott like that. I suppose I should have helped, but I was worried about my reputation." Warren looked at him steadily. "A man died because you worried more about yourself than about doing what was right. That is something you have to live with, not me." It was not forgiveness, but it was honest, and Hartwell seemed to respect that. He nodded and walked away, and Warren never spoke poorly of him afterward, though he did not seek out his company either. By October, when the air was starting to cool and the leaves on the few trees around Jerome were turning gold, Warren knew he could not wait any longer. He had saved every penny he could, and he had spoken to his boss about his intentions. Mr. Robertson had been understanding, even generous, giving Warren a bonus and promising that if he ever wanted to come back to work, there would be a place for him. Warren spent a week in Prescott meeting with a land agent and a banker, putting together the pieces of his dream. When he rode back to Jerome, he had papers in his saddlebag and a ring in his pocket that had belonged to his mother, a simple gold band with a small ruby. He found Flora helping her father in the store, and the way her face lit up when she saw him made his heart clench with love. He had never imagined he could feel this way about anyone, this deep, abiding certainty that she was his future, his home, his everything. "Flora, can you take a break?" he asked. "I need to talk to you about something important." Thomas looked up from the ledger he was working on and met Warren's eyes. Whatever he saw there made him smile. "Go on, Flora. I can manage here." They walked to their spot on the back porch, but Warren was too nervous to sit. He paced a few steps, then turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I have loved you since the moment you looked at me in that store and agreed to try to save that man's life. You are brave and kind and beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man. I know we have not known each other long, just a few months, but I'm more certain of this than I have ever been of anything in my life." Flora's eyes were wide, her lips parted in surprise and hope. Warren dropped to one knee, pulling the ring from his pocket. "Flora Preston, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I bought land, 20 acres about 5 miles outside of town, with water rights and good grazing. It is not much yet, just raw land. But I will build you a house. It will take time, but I promise I will work every day to give you the life you deserve." Tears were streaming down Flora's face, but she was smiling, that brilliant smile that always made Warren feel like he had lassoed the sun. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Warren, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he stood up, she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love and joy bursting in her heart. They stood there on the back porch, wrapped in each other's arms as the October sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Thomas came out to find them like that, and when Warren turned to face him, still holding Flora close, Thomas was smiling. "I take it you asked her?" "Yes, sir." And she said yes. "Mr. Preston, I love your daughter more than my own life. I will work hard to provide for her, to protect her, to make her happy. You have my word on that." Thomas crossed the porch and pulled Warren into a rough embrace, clapping him on the back. "I know you will, son. I saw the kind of man you are that first day. You have my blessing, and my wife would have given hers too if she were here. She always said Flora would know the right man when she met him." They were married 6 weeks later, in early December of 1882, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Jerome. Flora wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and carried wildflowers that Warren had ridden into the hills to pick that morning. Nearly the whole town turned out, genuinely happy for the young couple who had brought a touch of romance and heroism to their rough mining community. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Dr. Crawford, who had come up from Prescott for the occasion, served as one of Warren's witnesses. Even Jack sent a telegram from Colorado, congratulating them and saying he had found good work in the mines and was finally living an honest life. After the ceremony, there was a reception at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Warren held Flora close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, both of them grinning like fools, unable to believe their good fortune. "Happy?" Warren murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Flora replied. "Is this real?" "Sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It is real. You are mine and I am yours, and we have the rest of our lives together." Warren pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I love you, Flora Rutherford." Hearing her new name made Flora's heart swell. "I love you too." They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Jerome, in the nicest room available, though neither of them paid much attention to the furnishings. They were too wrapped up in each other, in the joy and wonder of finally being together without restraint, of expressing physically what their hearts had been saying for months. In the morning, they set out for their land. Warren had been working on a small cabin whenever he could spare time, and with help from some of the men in town, he had managed to get the basic structure completed. It was rough and simple, just 2 rooms and a loft, but Flora thought it was the most beautiful house she had ever seen. "It is not much yet," Warren said, sounding anxious as he helped her down from the wagon, "but I will add on to it. In a few years it will be a proper house, I promise." "Warren." Flora turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "It is perfect because it is ours. We will build our life here together, and that is all I need." They spent the winter settling into married life, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Warren worked tirelessly on the ranch, building fences and a barn, buying their first few head of cattle with money he had saved and a small loan from the bank. Flora turned the cabin into a home, sewing curtains and making rugs, planting a garden in the spring that reminded her of her mother's. Thomas visited often, bringing supplies from the store and news from town. He was happy to see his daughter so well cared for, so obviously loved. Warren always treated him with respect and affection, and Thomas came to think of him as the son he had never had. By the summer of 1883, Flora knew she was pregnant. She told Warren one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to see his reaction. For a moment he looked stunned, then his expression transformed into pure joy. "A baby?" he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby?" "Yes." Flora laughed as Warren swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Warren knelt down, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your pa. I promise I will do my best to be a good one." Flora ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had ridden 80 miles to save a stranger, and in doing so had saved her too from a life of loneliness and wondering if she would ever find someone who understood her soul. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Warren was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying that Flora was working too hard or not resting enough. She found it endearing even when it was exasperating. In March of 1884, as spring was beginning to paint the desert with wildflowers, Flora went into labor. Warren rode like a demon to fetch the midwife from Jerome, a capable woman named Stella who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult, and Warren paced outside the bedroom for hours, terrified and helpless. When he finally heard the sharp cry of a newborn, he burst through the door to find Flora exhausted but smiling, holding a squirming bundle wrapped in blankets. "A boy," Stella announced, healthy and loud from the sound of it. Warren approached slowly, reverently, as if walking on sacred ground. Flora held out the baby to him, and he took his son with trembling hands, staring down at the tiny red face, the perfect little fingers that immediately wrapped around his thumb. "He is beautiful," Warren whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You are beautiful. Thank you, Flora. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas, after Flora's father, who cried when they told him. Little Tommy was a happy baby, and he thrived under the attention of his parents and grandfather. The ranch prospered too, slowly but steadily, as Warren's hard work and honest dealings built a reputation throughout the territory. 2 years later, Flora gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Mary after Flora's mother. Then, 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named William. The cabin had been expanded twice by then, growing into a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a wide porch, where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that strained the ranch's resources, seasons when cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There was a terrible fever that swept through the region when Tommy was 5, and Flora and Warren spent agonizing nights watching over their children, terrified they might lose them. But all 3 pulled through, and the experience only strengthened the family's bonds. Through it all, Warren and Flora's love remained constant, a bedrock foundation on which everything else was built. They still made time for each other, still took walks together in the evenings after the children were in bed, still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection they had felt that first day in the general store. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1892, Warren gave Flora a beautiful wooden rocking chair he had spent months crafting in secret. She cried when she saw it, not just because it was beautiful, but because of what it represented. All the hours he had spent thinking of her, working to create something that would bring her joy. "You have given me everything," Flora said, sitting in the chair and reaching for his hand. "A home, a family, a life filled with love. I could not have asked for more." Warren knelt beside the chair, looking up at her. His face was weathered now from years in the sun. His dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, but his green eyes held the same warmth and devotion they had always held. "Do you remember that day?" he asked. "The day I rode to Prescott?" "Of course. How could I forget?" "I have thought about it so many times over the years. If I had not stopped in Jerome that day, if I had ridden on to the next town, if I had decided it was not my problem and stayed out of it, we never would have met." Flora squeezed his hand. "But you did stop. You did help. That is who you are, Warren, a man who does the right thing even when it is hard, even when it costs you something." "Saving that stranger's life gave me everything," Warren said. "It gave me you." They sat together in the growing darkness, the chair rocking gently, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of knowing each other's hearts. Inside the house, they could hear their children playing some noisy game. Tommy bossing his younger siblings around the way older brothers do. "We should probably go referee before someone starts crying," Flora said with a smile. "Probably." But neither of them moved, content to stay in this moment a little longer. As the years passed, the Rutherford Ranch became a fixture in the area, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. Warren expanded gradually, eventually employing several ranch hands to help with the work. He treated them fairly, paid them well, and several of them stayed for years, becoming almost like family. Thomas Preston lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren reach adulthood. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1899 at the age of 75 with Flora and Warren by his side. They buried him next to Mary in the cemetery in Jerome, and Flora planted roses on both graves, tending them faithfully for the rest of her life. Tommy grew up to be a fine rancher himself, taking over more and more of the operation as Warren got older. Mary became a teacher, opening a small school on the edge of Jerome for the children of ranchers and miners who lived too far from town for regular schooling. William, who had inherited his father's restless spirit and his mother's kind heart, became a lawman, serving as deputy sheriff for the territory and eventually the state when Arizona achieved statehood in 1912. Warren and Flora were immensely proud of all 3 of their children, watching with joy as they built their own lives and families. They became grandparents 6 times over, and their house was frequently filled with the noise and chaos of grandchildren visiting. On Warren's 50th birthday, in the summer of 1906, Flora organized a surprise party, inviting people from all over the territory. She was amazed by how many came. Dozens of people whose lives Warren had touched over the years with his fairness, his generosity, and his simple decency. One unexpected guest was a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Jack Wilson. It took Flora a moment to recognize him as the wounded stranger from 24 years ago, the man whose life had brought her and Warren together. "I heard about the party," Jack explained, "and I had to come. Had to thank you both one more time. That second chance you gave me, I did not waste it. I worked hard, saved my money, and eventually started my own freight business. Been running it successfully for 15 years now." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "I have a wife and 3 daughters. I am respectable. And it all started because a cowboy I never met rode 80 miles through the night to save my life." Warren clasped Jack's hand firmly. "You saved yourself by choosing to live right after that. We just gave you the opportunity." "Maybe so, but I never forgot. And I never will." Jack looked around at the party, at the prosperous ranch and the happy family. "Looks like it worked out pretty well for you two as well." "Better than I ever dreamed," Warren said, pulling Flora close to his side. "That was the best ride I ever made." As the sun set on the party, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Warren and Flora stood together watching their family and friends celebrate. Tommy was there with his new wife, Sarah, clearly besotted with each other. Mary was laughing with a group of her students, her face animated as she told some story. William stood talking seriously with some of the older ranchers, already showing the bearing of a man others respected and turned to for guidance. "We did all right, didn't we?" Flora said softly. "We did better than all right." Warren turned to face her, and despite the silver in her hair and the lines around her eyes, he saw the same beautiful woman who had tried to save a stranger's life in a dusty general store. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "That moment when I stepped forward in that crowd. I could have stayed quiet, could have told myself it was not my problem. But something in me knew I had to act. And I think now, maybe that was fate or providence or whatever you want to call it. Maybe some things are just meant to be." Flora rested her head against his shoulder, watching their family, their legacy. "I think you are right. Some things are meant to be. Some people are meant to find each other. Even if it takes a wounded stranger and an 80-mile ride through the night?" "Especially then," Flora said, smiling up at him. "Those are the best stories." Warren and Flora lived to see Arizona become a state, to see automobiles begin replacing horses on the roads, to see the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they were young. But through it all, their love remained constant, a testament to what could grow from a single act of courage and compassion. Warren passed away in 1924 at the age of 68 after a brief illness. He died in his own bed, in the house he had built, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, with Flora holding his hand. His last words were to her, "Best ride I ever made." Flora lived another 8 years, tending the ranch with Tommy's help, playing with great-grandchildren, and keeping Warren's memory alive through the stories she told. She passed away peacefully in 1932 at the age of 72, and was buried next to Warren in the cemetery overlooking their ranch. On her headstone, at Tommy's insistence, they carved a simple epitaph. "She tried to save a stranger. She found forever love." The ranch remained in the Rutherford family for generations, each new owner hearing the story of how it all began. The story of a doctor who refused to help, a cowboy who rode 40 miles to find another, and 2 people whose lives were forever changed by a single act of decency and courage. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones where we choose to help someone in need, even when it costs us something, even when it would be easier to look away. And in that small cemetery, beneath the vast Arizona sky, Warren and Flora Rutherford rested side by side, their love story complete, their legacy living on in the family they had built together and the countless lives they had touched through their simple commitment to doing what was right. The land they had homesteaded, the house Warren had built with his own hands, the family they had raised with love and devotion, all stood as testament to a truth they had discovered that long ago August day in 1882, that sometimes saving a stranger's life can save your own, that courage and compassion can lead to unexpected joy, and that true love once found endures beyond even death itself. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on that land, still tell that story, still visit those graves, and lay flowers there each anniversary. And sometimes on warm summer evenings, people swear they can see two figures walking hand in hand across the ranch, a tall cowboy and a woman in a yellow dress, forever together, forever young, forever in love. The story of Warren Rutherford and Flora Preston became more than just a family tale. It became part of the folklore of Jerome, Arizona, told to visitors and newcomers as an example of what the West was really about. Not just violence and lawlessness, but also courage, compassion, and the enduring power of love. It reminded people that heroes were not always famous gunfighters or legendary lawmen, but sometimes just ordinary people who made the choice to do the right thing even when it was hard, even when no one would have blamed them for walking away. And that choice, that single moment when Warren Rutherford stepped forward in a crowded general store and said he would ride 40 miles to find a doctor, echoed through the decades, a reminder that our actions matter, that compassion can change lives, and that sometimes the most important journey we take is the one we make for someone else. Because in saving that stranger, Warren had found his purpose, his home, and his heart's desire. And Flora, in choosing to fight for a dying man's life, had found the partner who would walk beside her through every joy and sorrow that life could bring. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started with one. It was a story of quiet devotion, of choosing each other every day, of building a life together one moment at a time. It was about morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, about working side by side through hard times, about the joy of watching children grow and the satisfaction of a job well done. It was about finding home not in a place, but in a person, and having the courage to hold on to that with both hands and never let go. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy Warren and Flora left behind, greater even than the prosperous ranch or the children who carried on their name. They left behind proof that love, real love, the kind that endures and deepens and grows stronger with time, is not just the stuff of fairy tales and fantasies. It exists. It is real. And sometimes, if we are very lucky and very brave, we find it in the most unexpected places, through the most unlikely circumstances, all because a cowboy decided that a stranger's life was worth an 80-mile ride, and a woman decided that trying to save that life was worth getting blood on her best dress, all because two people looked at each other in a moment of crisis and saw something that would shape the rest of their lives, all because they chose courage over comfort, compassion over convenience, and love over loneliness. That is the story of Warren and Flora Rutherford. That is the legacy they left behind. And that is why, more than a century later, people still tell their tale, still visit their graves, and still believe that true love, when you are lucky enough to find it, is worth any ride, any risk, any sacrifice. Because in the end, love is what matters. Love is what endures. Love is what makes us human and gives our lives meaning. Warren knew that when he climbed on a tired horse and rode through the gathering darkness toward Prescott. Flora knew it when she pressed her hands against a stranger's wound and refused to let him die. And together they proved it, every day for the rest of their lives until they passed into legend, and their love story became the kind of tale people tell to remind themselves what is possible, what is real, and what is worth fighting for. In the end, it was not the 40-mile ride that mattered most, though that took courage. It was not the successful rescue, though that took determination. It was the 50-plus years that came after, the lifetime they built together, the family they raised, the love they shared. That was the real journey, the one that mattered, the one that made their story worth telling. And somewhere perhaps in whatever comes after this life, Warren and Flora are still together, still in love, still grateful for that August day in 1882 when a wounded stranger stumbled into a general store and changed two lives forever. Still thankful for the journey that started with a desperate ride through the desert night and ended with a love that transcended time itself. That is their story. That is their truth. And that is their gift to all of us who hear it. The reminder that courage, compassion, and love can transform ordinary lives into something extraordinary, and that sometimes the most important choice we make is simply to help someone in need, because we never know where that choice might lead us, or what miracles might flow from one moment of simple human decency.